Jeff Patenaude's daughter, Pharis Patenaude.
Yes.
Good day.
Hello, Maureen.
Thank you very much for taking time from your busy schedule to tell us about everything that is you.
Oh, dear.
Right?
Oh, wow.
Now, let's go back a few years.
Okay.
And you grew up near this house.
I grew up in this house.
In this house. Tell me about that.
So I grew up not in this particular house. We grew up in a log cabin that was sort of the back half of this house here. And originally when Mom and Dad bought the place in the 70s, there was one log cabin on site. And then that one burned down before I was born, so they built another one on site, same spot, and raised, I think, all four of us kids. Maybe, might have been just three, might have been four in that house. And then they added on this large house that we're sitting into now. So this bigger house is the one that I mostly grew up in.
Great. So let's go back and we talked about a few people. Mm-hmm. Jeff Patenaude is your dad.
Is my dad.
And who is your mom?
My mom is Emily Patenaude, and she's from Vancouver originally. Her maiden name was Story. She's English background in there. And then I have two younger sisters, Ciel and Marin, and my younger brother is Cole.
So you're the eldest.
I am the eldest of four.
Does it show?
Sure, I'm a bossy pants. Why not? No, we're all. There's three girls within 4 years of each other, so we were very close growing up, and still are very, very close to this day. One sister lives 10 minutes up the road that way now, and then the other sister lives part-time in Vancouver, but also has a house that's on the back of Dad's property that has a whole other story with it. Everything has a story, as you'll find with a lot of us who've developed. I moved back to Horsefly 10 years ago after leaving for about 15 years or so. I went down to Vancouver Island to Victoria to go to school and spent a lot of years there, played a lot of music, a bunch of bands, a bunch of different jobs. And when I came back to Horsefly, I realized that the placement of being in Horsefly, especially considering that I wanted to have children with my husband, and the idea that my children would be sixth generation Horsefly, was very appealing to me, because I feel like one of the things that's happened to so many of us is that we feel dissociated as far as community and where our sense of place and a sense of empathy for both the people and the land that we live on. So to give myself that and to give my children that by coming back to where I was born feels very amazing.
So the entire family was here?
Yes, the whole family was here.
Give me some of your childhood memories.
Oh, no. Oh, no, I should say, oh, yes, because they're all really good. We have a creek right down here, and my dad, at one point, this creek floods fairly strongly in the springtime, but it also is an amazing place for swimming all summer. And so my dad, just in the spot right over there, widened out the creek and brought in a whole load of sand and put it all there, and then piled a bunch of rocks on the other side, because he has every piece of machinery known to man and knows how to build. He's incredibly artistic, and I think that's one of the things that also comes from living remotely, where you learn kind of how to do everything yourself, and you always need to have a spare part around, and you always need to have a spare machine around to fix the machine that might have broken down. But he has all of these machines, and he dumped all of the rocks and logs, made a whole swimming hole and a diving spot and summertime swimming spot. So that's where we spent most of our summers there. And us kids, we just spent all of our time on this land. And this land has changed over the years. Dad's cleared out more spots and made hay fields and logged areas and put little houses and cabins in various spots. And there's a boneyard back there that's just old cars. That's layer upon layer of old cars, because he took all of the old cars that were there and squashed them down and buried them underground and then put another layer of old cars there. And it's magic land as a child. And we just spent all of our time exploring around here. We have teepees we built and moss forests and all of this magic. It's a magical place to live out here in the woods. Lots of memories of driving around in machinery, being hauled around in a loader bucket, driving in the back of the dump truck. Dad collects old cars in various states of disrepair, but sometimes running. And he had a 38 Dodge with the double open the suicide doors and open the vents on the engine. And it had beautiful running boards and rounded off areas around the headlights. And us kids would all ride on those, going down the road and hanging onto the doors on the running boards. And just so many memories of driving down the gravel road and doing that. And I strongly remember having a bee sting me on the lip while I was hanging onto one of the running boards driving down one day. But it goes on and on and on. Memories like that. And all associated with being fairly free country kids. I didn't wear a helmet until I went to university. I don't remember wearing a seatbelt. I don't remember sitting in a car seat. I don't remember any of those things. And it's maybe a wonder that more of us have all our fingers. We have, I remember my parents coming downstairs when I was 5 years old and finding me making them a Christmas present on the bandsaw at 5 years old. And just, it was free. You want to learn how to use the welder? Go for it. You want to learn how to use the blowtorch? Go for it. You want to learn how to use the bandsaw? Go for it. And on and on. And then it was all surrounded by music all the time as well. My dad's a great singer and a great songwriter. So he sang to all of us. Essentially, we came out of the womb singing and just learning all of his songs especially. And so we would travel around as a family country band with the four of us kids.
What was it called?
It was called the Patenaude Family Band. That was it. But the four of us kids on stage with my dad singing his songs. And when I was about 4, my dad decided he wanted to take singing lessons, and he started taking lessons from a woman named Williams Lake. Her name was Grace Dunford, and she was an ex-nun and ex-professional opera singer. So to have that woman in Williams Lake was extraordinary. And my dad, while he was taking lessons, I decided I wanted to take lessons. So I started taking conservatory singing and conservatory piano from her at 4 and continued on until I was 20. And so taking that conservatory style training with the rigorous practice that's required, but also the informal setting of just family music. And all the family plays music. And this goes back to like my great-great-grandmother playing for parties and dances that people had. What
does she play?
She played piano. She said, the thing they said about my great-grandma, whose name was Annie Moore, she was the youngest in a family of 12, I believe.
This is a school teacher.
She's a school teacher,
right.
That's right. So she's a school teacher in the area, but they said that she could read music before she could read books. And she pushed that onto all of her children. My grandfather, Harold, who's my dad's dad, is one of those kids. And that, they just continued. Music was an integral part of life. It wasn't something that was done by other people. It was always just a part of the family. And all 4 of us kids now play music. 3 of us play music professionally, and 1 plays music passionately. So it's quite cool. Sorry, I'm meandering.
I love the story you're telling. Because that led to a lifestyle.
Yes.
So
it's a beautiful lifestyle that when you're raised here, and I don't know if everybody's raised that way, but in the Caribbean and in Horsefly in particular, when someone stops by, you stop what you're doing and you offer them a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and you sit down for a chat. And that's just how I was raised. And that's part of the informal flexing nature of the day. The day doesn't always have a rigorous schedule to it. It does when you have kids in school and things like that, but I didn't grow up with parents who were working a 9-to-5 job, who were doing that. Dad was just, maybe he was away at logging camp, or maybe he was out fixing the tractor on it's just part of being a farmer or a rancher or a logger. You're sort of working all the time, but your kids get to hover around. And having that sense of informal community all the time as well, people just dropping by, music parties, they just happened, and you went out and there always seemed to be somebody playing music at every party that happened. It's really, and so to grow up in something that seems normal and to be able to offer that gift onto my kids, that gift that my dad gave me, and he would have grown up with that as well and generations back, it's a very settling way to be. It's a little bit manic, because it just means you're always, none of us sit still very well, it seems like, and I think you'll find some country people sit still really well. That's what they want to do, but there's often too much to be done to sit still. And I like that kind of self-responsibility that happens where you kind of have to take care of things yourself. And if you don't take care of things yourself, you're cold in the winter, or you're sad, or your body doesn't feel good, or whatever it is. There's many things that happen. So, yeah.
Tell me about your family.
My children, myself?
Children,
my husband. I met my husband at an old-time fiddle jam in Victoria.
And what's his name?
His name is Jason Romero, and he's from California. He was raised in rice-growing country outside of the Sacramento River Valley, so he grew up in a small town as well, swimming in rice paddy ditches and stuff in the summertime, and avidly hunting with his dad. And he's very much an introvert and very much a very happy man when he's just out in the bush and doing things. But he started playing banjo at the age of 20, and then took some fine woodworking courses in his later 20s, and he's ended up, when I met him, he was one of the most in-demand custom banjo builders in the world, and now we've built the company up into something that's got about a 5 or 6 year wait list for a custom banjo with really high-end people all around the world. It's a remarkable way. So we can make, again, we're self-employed, not working a 9-to-5 job. I think there's something that I hold very close to that in myself, is some people want that. You do your job and then you come home, and they're very separate, and that fills people's hearts with joy, some people, and it doesn't fill mine with joy. I was never very good at a 9-to-5 job, because sometimes I feel like working and sometimes I don't, but I'm a really hard worker, but I like to be able to do it on my own terms. Maybe that's because I have such a badass dad who just wanted to do things on his own terms, and that's just how it is. I don't know, I got that from both my parents.
Where's the studio?
The studio is at our home here. So when Jason and I met, he was still living in California. We got married 2.5 months after we met. I was living in Victoria. He moved up to British Columbia, was a permanent resident about 5 months later. And then we were looking around for places to buy, and we couldn't afford on Vancouver Island. We both want property. We both don't want to look at neighbors. So we ended up finding this place on the other side of Horsefly from here, about a 10 minutes drive down towards Horsefly Lake. And it's 40 acres on a lake and a river. It's really quite beautiful. It's a very, very special place to live, and people have been living there for thousands of years. It's an old First Nations village site as well, with pit houses and everything on it. I feel a extreme sense of grateful responsibility almost to be the caretaker for this short period of my lifetime of such an amazing piece of property with salmon run coming through it, and just, yeah, it's extremely amazing. And then we moved the banjo shop up with us. It's right next to our house. And we had our first child almost 6 years ago now, born at home in Horsefly, with a midwife who's a friend of ours, came up from Vancouver. There's no midwives in the entire Caribou area. There's nobody. So if you don't want to have babes in a hospital, which was my choice, that's what I wanted to do then. But I didn't want to have an unassisted birth either. So both Jason and I thought, let's see if we could have somebody come up with us. So first child was born at home with my mom and my 2 sisters there. It was quite magical. And then our second child was born 2.5 years later and born at home as well. Horsefly, our son, who's 3.
And what are the kids' names?
Our first daughter's Indigo Hope, and Indigo Hope Romero. I did change my last name to Romero when I got married, which maybe... It was never something I thought I would do, but I really like symmetry, and Pharis has 6 letters and Romero has 6 letters, so why not? And that way I have the same last name as my kids. And family names are a tricky thing, because Patenaude, I love the name, and I feel very connected to it because of the family history and because it's family, but it's not my mom's last name either, or my grandmother's and all those, and so I'm okay with the flexibility as long as I can hold the stories of all the people who I'm linked to through all of that close, even through changing names.
And your second-born's
My
name?
second-born is Sai. And Sai, S-Y.
S-Y.
Sai Story. So Story is my mom's maiden name, and then Hope is my middle name, my mom's middle name, my grandmother's middle name, and it's also the name of one of my great uncles on my dad's.
Hope Patenaude, the telegrapher.
That's right, correct.
Exactly.
Indeed, yeah. And I have a friend who did his master's on the CBC archive interviews of Imbert Orchard, and he found an interview from Hope and Bryson, and he sent it over to me, and that's what ended up taking him. He's a very famous personal historian now, but that took him on the entire pathway, because he realized that these were stories that were linked to real people, to be able to know me and know that these were my relatives speaking about that. That is very cool.
You'll be happy to know that I listened to those interviews in Victoria.
And you know that the reason they're digitized is because of him. It's because
really?
of my
Wow.
friend's masters.
That's fabulous.
Because they were all sitting on reels and they hadn't been digitized
There you go.
yet, and that's what he did. So yeah, it's pretty magical.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Glad you've got a copy.
Yeah, I am too. Sorry, I really am rambling today.
Not at all.
It's really neat when you try and sit down and figure out the the cohesive and important events of your life, and often when you're just talking, they're not the ones that you imagine they would be, the first ones to come out. So, yeah.
No, we're doing fine. We're doing fine.
Good.
Now, so at what point did music become a serious part of your life?
Oh, it always has been. It always. We went to lessons every single week. I took piano and voice. My sisters took piano, singing, saxophone, various other things. We were required to practice every day. That was because Mom and Dad were paying good money for lessons, and so it was always one of the things that was a structure of my life. I could do whatever I wanted. I could party. I could do whatever I wanted as long as I didn't mess up in music and I didn't mess up in school. And so those were the things that were given to me as these are what you need to do. The rest of it is your choice. And that was quite a wonderful way to grow up. I put it aside a little while in university. I have an undergrad degree in botany and entomology. I'm a total geek when it comes. I love plants and bugs, but I also took songwriting courses for credit at university as well, and then just ended up in a few bands over time, and I've been touring, and now it's a large part of my life. My husband and I have won 2 Juno Awards. We've won a bunch of songwriters awards.
Okay, so how did this come about? How did this come about?
Well, pretty naturally, because he's a great banjo player, and I saw so much music growing up, and was at festivals so often growing up, and feeling the joy that a community of music brings to people. Not necessarily, I mean, there's one thing about standing on stage and being a performer and feeling lifted up by the energy of everybody around you, but it's the community of music. It's the community of other people who play music and think and talk about music, and you can get together with people that you have absolutely nothing else in common with, and you can sit down and you can play music. It's amazing, and can't always do that in other forms of artistic expression or just in conversation with people, you know. So Jason's an amazing banjo player, and he really loves old-time music that comes from particularly the southeastern Appalachian Mountains of the United States. So we both were pretty deep in active study.
Is that like bluegrass?
Yeah, it's pre-bluegrass.
Pre-bluegrass.
Okay. Bluegrass came out especially in the 40s. Bill Monroe was the innovator of bluegrass. And he took what was old-time music, which is early fiddle, banjo music, unaccompanied vocal music, that was a combination of European immigrants to the States, African American influences, Scandinavian influences, Native American influences, all these things coming into this melting pot that were many of the tunes came from either African American or European roots, and then combined together with all these isolated valleys, isolated pockets, because we're in an age of mass communication, and they were not, right? Many people didn't leave their valley almost ever. So these really unique styles of playing came out of each of these regions. And the fiddle and the banjo were most commonly played together in those, and played in many different tunings, you know, retuning the strings to get different sounds. And a lot of the music was community music, and a lot of it was dance kitchen music. So it's got a very danceable groove, so to speak. And then a lot of it was music for people to be able to remember events that happened in their community, because many people didn't read. And as the words get changed over time and obscured, it's still, you know, there's so many songs about certain events that happened, a murder or a killing or a grieving, often a negative thing that happened. That's the way we remember these things, or a tragedy of some sort of mind collapsing. And then as the guitar came in, then it started to sort of modulate the sounds. The guitar came in about the 1910s when the Sears and Roebuck catalog became very popular. The guitar would come in and it changed, it sort of moved the sound of it. But those early recordings, those runs from the very early days of radio, you know, the 1927s, 28s, when they would send a person out into a valley with an Edison recorder to record it on one wax cylinder, and then the record companies would replicate it. Those recordings are magical, because those people, they would sit and they would record 20 songs in a day, and they'd just sit and sing. And that it's just like the energy that comes out of them. And many of the digitized versions that we have, which are all we have available now most of the time, sometimes you can find some of the old records, the original pressings, but those are rare. But the digitized versions of them, often the scratches are louder than the music. So you have to have a real desire to dig into that music and still feel it. And both Jason and I were really, really deep into that desire when we first met. And because I also have a songwriting bent, that's slowly morphed into what we do, and then we started playing more as a duo. We did a lot of traditional music to start, and then it's just shifted over time as music will and as music does. But it was the first thing we ever did together, was play music. That's before we even had a conversation. We were playing music in a jam, so it's been the start, and banjos have always been an integral part of that, because that's how we met. He built a banjo for an old bandmate of mine, and then we met about a year later after that, and that's sort of how it goes.
So what moment launched your career?
Oh, I don't think there is one. I think it's just naturally happened. There wasn't a like, oh, this person heard us and played our song on the radio or anything like that. It's always been a natural morphing. You know, I was in Bob Dylan and Grateful Dead cover bands for years, as well as being at music camps has probably been a really fundamental part of it, because when you're at a music camp, you're in a community of people. You are there, and they all have a different viewpoint, and you gravitate towards the people who have a viewpoint that meshes, that feels good. And for me, I get excited about that, and I want to learn more, and it lifts me up. And so those jams at 4 a.m. where you're all completely in and your knees are touching and you're all together, that's what probably made me fall so deeply in love with the style of music that we play, I think. Yeah.
And then someone phones and says, you've been nominated for a Juno.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Oh, well, the first time, it's so neat to be able to say that, right? It's a little astonishing with these things. Awards are very interesting, because all you can do is just celebrate how incredibly lucky you are in that moment of time. Awards don't necessarily say that you're better than the other people. Awards recognize, for me, they recognize hard work, they recognize integrity, they recognize all of these things, as well as recognizing the music. But I would happily share it with every single person who's been nominated, every person who's submitted, because people are working their butts off today in music. They are working so very, very hard to get noticed. There is so much music out there. So I don't actually remember getting nominated the first time, but I think when we won the Juno...
What year was that?
2016.
Okay.
Yep, it was 2016, so that was for our record before this one. And I was just out for a walk with my kids in the field, and then I came back in and I got a text message from a friend who was in the audience, just like, yay!
What was the name of the album?
It was called A Wanderer, I'll Stay.
A Wanderer, I'll Stay.
A Wanderer, I'll Stay, and I won Songwriter of the Year for the Western Canadian Music Awards for that one, and we were nominated for 4 Canadian Folk Music Awards for that one, I think, as well. And then this most recent one, our son was born, and then 2 weeks later, our son, so the first one, our son was born, and then 2 weeks later, I came home, we were out for a walk, and we won the Juno. So I really feel like we won the big grand prize. And we built a house that year, and our workshop burned down, and we built a workshop that year. Like, so much happened in that year. It was totally crazy. But then this most recent one, I was out at a friend's place who was part of a grand plot to throw me a surprise 40th birthday party. And I came home to this thing, and Jason was like, we just won the Juno. And then I walked in the house, and there was a surprise 40th birthday party. It was kind of an overwhelmingly great day. Great days, right? They're very, very cool. And we won an Independent Music Award for Americana Album of the Year, a couple of Canadian Folk Music Awards for Vocal Ensemble and Vocalist of the Year for the last record as well.
So what was that one called?
This is called Sweet Old Religion. And this was the record that I wrote after we'd spent a year off the road and building our house and rebuilding the shop, and just, a lot of big, big feelings of happiness and gratitude that came with that record.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where do you go from here?
Oh, I keep writing. I just keep writing. We've spent the summer on the road playing. I just got home from the Edmonton Folk Music Festival, and the summer has been a festival every weekend. And camps, I'm the artistic director for a singing camp in the States, so I get to hire people from all around the world and be a part. I've taught there for about 14 years now, I think. And then I'm working on a new record that we'll record in December, and then Jason's working on an all banjo record that we'll put out through a lovely large record label in the States. And we get to do all this and live in Horsefly and attempt to somehow find some work-life balance in the middle of all of it, and building banjos and having kids and making records and things like that.
Well, you were just touring in Europe with your kids.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
We flew over to the Netherlands and brought Jason's half-sister as our nanny, and played a bunch of beautiful, beautiful theaters and sort of folk-style venues in the Netherlands, and we're there at peak tulip season, so we got to rent bicycles and cycle in the tulip fields and ride some horses, and then we went and had a couple days in London and made our way up to northern Scotland, where we took the ferry up to the Shetland Islands for the Shetland Island Folk Festival, which is unbelievably magical up there. There's no trees, and it's just as close to Norway as it is to Aberdeen, to Scotland. So the Scandinavian influences, I mean, and the history of it is Canada, at least in like our sense of where our history lies, our languages. You know, we're such a young country in terms of our large impact on the land. We're not a young country in terms of habitation, but large impact on the land. People were much smarter about impact on the land before white people came along, as far as I'm concerned. And in the Shetland Islands, people have been inhabiting those islands for so long and have modified the landscape for so long, many thousands of years, that you get people who are out cutting peats on the land, because that's what they burn up there, that their ancestors may have built up those peats 1,000 years ago through sheep farming and that's how they were created. And it's such a different perspective on time there. It's mind-boggling. And you had the Picts, and then the Vikings came in, and then you have the Danes, and then you have the Scots, and all of these changes, and it's really, really wonderful. It's amazing to be part of it. But it feels very different over there. You can feel those multiple thousands of years of human impact on the land, whereas in a place like Horsefly, it is wild, and we can feel years of human impact, but it is not sculpted in the same way, because there's so few of us, and that's both appealing and terrifying to people. I think it's very appealing to me and very appealing to my husband. So I'm glad we get to come home to this place. Mm.
What are your next anticipated outings with respect to music?
We fly to Toronto on Friday for Summer Folk Festival and in sound. Just Jason and I. This will be one of our first outings without the kids, so that's kind of cool. We'll miss them, but it's also neat to go spend time by ourselves. And we're home for 2 weeks, and then we drive to Oregon for the Sisters Folk Festival in Bend, Oregon, and go play a couple shows down there. Go down for a wedding. And then just shows out in October. More shows. We go play the Banff Centre next April. I'm trying to figure out tours and managing the balance of everything with kids. We'll go to Australia in a couple of years. Yeah. But we have to be at home building banjos. That's part of it too. And that artistic output. I love doing things with my hands. I really, really do. And I always saw my dad be incredibly creative with his hands, and I think because he saw his dad, it's just that sense of artistry in function, things that both function and look beautiful. All of us kids have inherited that. We love all those things, and so I like to be able to add on to that myself in maybe different ways. I love making jewelry and doing metal work, and I make jewelry from all of the leftover bits from the banjo making process, and I do all of the inlay and metal work for the banjos as well. And then my husband's the woodworker, because he's amazing at what he does, and there's no CNC, there's no computer or laser work, and what we do, everything is done by hand, and it's all custom made by us or parts custom made for us. So the whole thing is it's quite special when they come out. The finished instrument has been described as looking as if it's been unearthed, because they've got a very natural, patinated, earthy look to them, and they sound that way as well. They're quite special. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Very
it really
cool.
is.
So what have I not covered in our conversation that you would like to bring forward?
Dad, is there anything I should talk about?
Well, how about just make something up?
Just make something up. Make something up. Oh, you know, living in Horsefly has been amazing. I'm not going to make something up, but I just thought about something. I'm very excited to start working with the Horsefly Historical Society and learning from them about how to interview the elders in the community. That's one of the things I get to do next in the fall. Hopefully, I'll do that. And I'd like to come on as a member of the Horsefly Historical Society because they do so much. And if you go in there and you sit, and the boxes of things that they have, the information, the photographs, the documents, the writings from people in the community that so many of us in the community have no idea about. And there's this core group of people who are aging, who know about these things. And many of the old families in the area aren't a part of the Horsefly Historical Society, and I'd really like to do that because I am really into the idea that my family's been here for a while. And I don't know enough about my family's history. You know, even talking to Dad and getting stories from him about his growing up and his knowledge of the family's history, there's so much to learn that I get really excited about that next stage in that. And there are history keepers in our family, people like Bronwyn Patenaude, who's written many amazing books about the family. She was Wilfred Patenaude's wife, and Wilfred was my uncle, my grandfather's brother. And I would like to be able to contribute to that, to learn, and so that my kids know as well, because it is tricky when you don't have that last name anymore. For some reason, it starts to, you start to look at more of whatever your personal name is, and I spend a lot of time thinking about why that is and how I can shift that in myself, and because I do carry on that I'm from here. I am a Romero, but I'm also a Patenaude. I get to hold both of them.
Well, by doing this interview, you are contributing to that continuation of history.
That's the hope. That's the hope that we get to be interested in, that my kids, I get to talk to my kids knowledgeably about not just my experiences, but the experiences of people who I never met. I never got to meet my great-grandmother. And I'm always so happy when people do get to know their great-grandparents and the experiences. I wish I could have had that. And I would like to spend more time learning the stories of my family, I think. And that's, interviews like this, and I think a lot of people have that. Some people just aren't interested in that history, and that's totally okay. That's you gotta stick in the present if that feels good.
Well, maybe it's time for another large family gathering.
We try. We're all a little bit all over the place. There's most of Dad's siblings are, not most, but many of Dad's siblings are here, but they're kind of reclusive, as people who were raised in the woods can tend to be. Some of them are very outgoing, and some of them are reclusive. It is a big family some families are really good at keeping in touch, and we're not as good at keeping in touch. It seems like there's cousins all over the place that I never see, and just, yeah.
Well, best of luck in all your endeavors.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'll make sure you get to see the final product.
I hope so.
Absolutely.
On a parting note, I do wish, as part of your project, I really do wish that my family had continued to speak French, that was a part of my family. But I know that, as far as I know, and my dad might correct me on this, my great-grandfather did not want to speak French once he came out here. And in fact, he worked very hard to remove the French accent from his English, and especially from his sons. It wasn't a sign of stature, I think. And I mourn that, and I mourn that in this region where there are a lot of old French families, that we don't have access to it necessarily. I took French up until grade 7, but the pronunciation was appalling. And I think in an effort to just fill in that family history, it would probably be a good thing. put it in my mind. Think about it.
Well,
One thing
it
to
was a
add
different time, right?
It was a different time, but I find it really interesting that that was something that was, and I don't know if you've run into that with other interviews, but that it wasn't a sign of pride for families once they came out here to keep speaking French, that English was like, no, we speak English, that's what we do.
You hit the nail right on the head, historically.
Oh, interesting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So there was no remaining within that cultural group, and neither was there for celebrating any kind of Métis-ness either.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So no, you're right there.
You know what's really amazing in music? It's because we're actively involved with a lot of traditional music. The celebration around Métis fiddling and Aboriginal fiddling traditions is very, very significant. And that's something that, and around singing traditions, that's something that I absolutely love, is how important people recognize these musical styles. And just folk music in general. It's not just an offhanded thing that people do in their kitchen. It is an art form. And the idea that like funding is available, especially through things like Canada Council or Smithsonian and those things in the States, that funding is available to actively document these art forms. It's kind of amazing. I am grateful for that we recognize it as such.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be coming knocking at your door
Do
for
it.
that in about 20 years.
Do it.
Bravo again,
Thank you
and
very
thank
much.
you.
My pleasure. Thank you.